Hello and welcome to the new tutorial series about workflows in Unreal Engine, Houdini, and back to Unreal Engine. In this tutorial series, we're going to talk about creation of this sakura tree. It's a spring, sakuras are blooming, and just about the time to make a blooming tree tutorial. So this tree I made for last year ArtStation Challenge, Neo Tokyo ArtStation Challenge. And let's see how I've done it. Just a quick note, I'm going to use Houdini for creation of the flowers and tree itself, but initial prototyping was made in Unreal Engine. So if you only interested in tree itself, the branches and flowers and leaves, you might want to skip this one because this tutorial will end with us exporting splines from Unreal Engine into Houdini. So you might want just to wait for the second part. But here we're going to talk about prototyping in Unreal Engine. So let's get started. This scene was based on a beautiful concept art by Flora Silva. As you can see, I tried to recreate the tree as close to the initial concept art as I could, and let's hear how I did it. So here's the scene. I tried to make some changes in mood and environment. It's pretty heavy tree. It's not gonna work, for instance, for the games, because you can see each petal, it's separate geometry, each leaf is separate geometry. There are ways to make it more game friendly, and maybe we're going to talk about it somewhere in the end, but initially let's focus on making the tree itself. By the way, it's about 600,000 polygons, so not light at all, but I wanted fidelity, and I only made it for the scene, so I didn't really care that much about optimization in my case. So now you know that fact, and let's get started with tutorial itself. So how did I do prototyping? How do you usually do prototyping in Unreal Engine? First, I grabbed the concept art, as you can see here, and I made in Photoshop, I made a white layer, which is not visible when I'm working on outlines, and I basically outlined the most important parts of the concept art to have idea about where my main objects that will make my scene as close to concept art as possible, in just black lines on a white background, and I paid special attention to try to outline the main branches of the tree and also a human figure. It was really nice of Flora to put a human figure in the scene, and I assumed that this is a girl. And I have Hannah character. She's the character of Megascans, not Megascans, I'm sorry, metahumans. I made the tree myself, and it doesn't look nice right now because of her pose. So anyways, Hannah is about the same height as I am. That's why I'm always using her as a reference of the size. So yeah, she has some animation that makes her posture accurate, and the dress is for some reason didn't work well. Okay, but you can see on the picture here that it did work, so it's not that bad in reality. Yeah, this is her final her usual pose. So after I'm done, and one more thing, this is the case where I made an error. As you can see, the initial concept art has a little bit unconventional size, 1920 by 943 pixels, where usual would be 1080. So proportion is a little bit not standard, and I didn't take it into account when I did it. So I did it the way it is. And you can see on my initial reports, which I don't have this scene anymore, you can see that I made outline of the tree pretty accurate. But if you look into actual scene right now, when I changed the camera settings to be more standard 1920 by 1080, more standard proportion 16:9, you can see that right now concept art and my shape do not really match. So before starting to work to prototype in Unreal, I would recommend to check what's the proportion of your initial concept art is. And in this case, if I notice that ahead of time, I would just add like margins on the top and the bottom to make the image correct, the same proportions, but the frame, to make frame better, more true to my future camera frame. But anyways, I started from this. So this is my outline that I will use later for prototyping. Then I go into Unreal Engine and I create a camera. This is kind of reverse engineered from the ready scene because, as I said, I don't have version where I actually started prototyping. So it looked like this. With the correction that now the camera settings are different, let's see what I do to be able to work with it. So before camera is locked, you can see that outline is right in it. How do I do that? So I imported the picture, I saved it as PNG, I imported it into Unreal Engine just as usual texture. You can see that just nothing weird. It doesn't even matter which compression settings we're using. Then I create my camera and I kind of I put in the settings that I need, but initially, as I said, I put the settings that would match the frame of the concept art, which was kind of mistake. So anyways, after I create camera, I just play with focal lengths to try to find out which one will work for me. You can see outline on the screen. And then how do I do outline? I go into lens, dirt mask, and I add my image as a dirt mask, and I put intensity. So usual intensity is 0, as you can see, and I put some intensity just depending on the scene, depending on light, whatever works to be able to see it. And then when I have my camera with my outline, I'm just trying to find the angles that will work. Like I have like idea that, okay, I have a human figure. I'm trying to match a human figure. Then I know that this stone not supposed to be taller than the person. So I'm studying concept art very, very closely and trying to guess what height the element could be. Like for instance, you can see that this light is about, like let's say that if the figure is 5.5 feet tall, then the light has to be 2.5 to 75, so about, I don't know, 90 centimeters. No, wait a second, hold on, 80 centimeters, like about 80 centimeters tall. So, and then I also made, even for the blockout of the scene, I also made my lights. I turn them on, off, I'm afraid. Hold on a second. Oh yeah, so I initially added the lights. I added the stones, again, about the size of just trying to match everything to human figure, trying to make sense of everything what's going on the concept art, and trying to like say, okay, the stones are definitely not taller than the character is. And so I added some stones, and when I added in this scene, when I added the stones, the lanterns, the stones around pool, and the figure, I found my my camera settings that would allow me to find position of the camera and settings of the focal lengths that kind of match the position of all the elements with my scene. So this is how I usually build my scenes. I know that there are other ways to match kind of precisely concept art to the actual 3D scene, but I found that this one works the best for me because it allows me for the first to move camera anyway, to change settings from the camera, and my image, my concept art is always here, and that makes it super convenient. So when I set up my main elements, now it was the time of making the tree, and I really wanted to have all the branches matching the initial outline. So here I usually use my trusty blueprint to make splines. Let's see how it's made. Well, first let's get out of the camera. So it's super simple blueprint, which I named BP trunk, and I'm using a very simple cylinder as an element that is just bent and repeated constantly along the spline. So the geometry itself is simple, super simple. So it's just a cylinder. As you can see, it's 1 meter by meter by meter. So it can be whatever. You just need to be cylinder because I can regulate the thickness of it in my settings, like this. So let's take a look at the blueprint. So we do it in constructions. Let's start from the beginning because this should be beginner friendly tutorial. So first, right click blueprint class actor, and you name your blueprint, you open it, and then you go to construction script and start from here. So I don't want to repeat it, so let's just see how it's done. Well, first I create a spline. I don't want to repeat it completely, but I do need to do some, at least to get started. So we add spline like this, and if you drag it in here, you'll have a reference for the spline. And also I will need two variables, section length and section width. Section length is not very important at this moment, but I do use this script, this blueprint, for different cases. That's why I always have section lengths and section widths. So how to do those? You go to variables, add plus, call it, make it give it some name, and make it float. And then after you compile it first time, you'll be able to add some values to it. And you can also make it public. So when you make it public, you can edit the value of the variable right in the editor. So with that said, we have section length and section width. Width is public. So we get our reference of our spline, use function getSpline length, because we need to know how many cylinders we need to repeat along the spline. And we have our variable, which in this case just 20. We divide the length of the spline by our variable. Then we truncate to cut out the decimals, and then we find the last point, the amount of cylinders in this spline. And we, while everything in Unreal starts from 0, we need to deduct 1 from it. And so then we start a loop. First index is 0, last index is our results of the length of the spline, which is calculated by engine automatically after we made the spline. And so we have our loop for each our element. Here we use function add spline mesh component, and here we select our cylinder and some material. I usually just use some super basic I wonder why. Well, usually usually it's really basic. Just albedo material, just something. In this case, I guess I was doing something else with it. That's why it's so complex. But normally that's the only thing that you need. Just the color. Just to have some material. Or you can just leave standard default Unreal Engine material. Okay, now it's gonna think. Sorry about that. So okay, while it's thinking, no, we cannot do nothing. This is not good. Okay, dark gray, this works. So we add our cylinder as the element that we're going to repeat along the spline. Then we set forward axis while our cylinder goes up. Yeah, it goes up, so it goes up, you can see, in Z direction. That's why we're using Z as forward axis of the mesh. If your cylinder will be like laying on its side, you just need to see which axis your mesh is using and use it accordingly here. Then I enable collision for some reason. Don't really need it here. And as you can see, every time we use our value of our mesh. Then okay, so now we have our spline, and we need not just repeat our mesh along the spline, we also need to bend it. Oh, and by the way, that's why cylinder, it cannot be just couple of rectangulars. It actually has to have geometry, something like this. So you can see that it consists of small-ish squares. It's yeah, it's still super simple, but it has to be able to be bent. So yeah, now let's look into our for loop cycle. So for each element, we take our spline and we use the function get location and at distance along the spline and get tangent at distance along the spline. And so this is for the why twice? For start position and for the end position. So we repeat the same two functions twice. We're using sectional lengths again as our variable. Then we clamp vector. Yeah, okay. And then we use the values into, so yes, we create the function set start and end, and we put in start position, start tangent, end position, and end tangent. Set, let's see if it's original view of the function start and set start and yes. So from our mesh, yes. So this is the original version of the function, because sometimes you need to split struct, but not in this case. So we just fill in the results of our calculations for each cylinder along the spline, and then we also use start scale and end scale, and we use section widths here. We only need to scale it while it's vertical only on X and Y axis, and we apply the scale. That will allow us to actually be able to scale according to the widths to our settings, each spline individually. So after we created the blueprint for the spline, we can actually use it like this. So we blueprints. So here's our trunk. We can just drag and drop the blueprint into the scene, and you can see it's huge because its section width by default is 7. I guess I used this script for something else initially. And then this will be the very beginning of our trunk, so we might as well put it in the beginning of the tree. And as you can see here my beginning of the spline doesn't actually match the beginning of like the world beginning of the future trunk. It doesn't matter really because we'll fix it later in Houdini. So when you get your first cylinder, first spline, you can like make it larger. You can add points along the spline. Add spline point here. You can also, when you selected the point, you can press Alt and pull it up, and that's how you create a new point. And from here you can bend your shape whichever way you need. And so that's pretty much how I did it. It was just a lot of back and forth and making the tree, and then I would make part of the spline, and then I would jump into my camera to see where I'm going with it. And that was pretty much it. Just back and forth. And then so this is the way I've made the first the main spline, which was the longest, the trunk and the longest branch all together of the tree. Let's see, let's look into, yeah, so this was my first, the longest one long spline. And then I just created the same way, either by copy pasting or dragging out from the content browser a new spline, and I made them a little thinner. So the secondary branches are 0.2. It doesn't matter at all in this case, because it's going to be all processed in Houdini later. But we do need to just like make sense for ourselves. So I tried to make them close to each other, while the challenge was pretty limited in time, so I didn't really make this tree beautiful from every possible angle, but I did try to make it as close as possible from this particular angle to match the concept art. Well, in real job, of course, I would make sure that the tree would look decent from all the angles. And so yeah, so this is how I approach the tree. And so you can see that in the end I have like a first spline, and then I have a series of secondary splines to work with. And it's actually convenient for the future in Houdini to have like first spline, to have it as a trunk. And well, when I was done with this part, so when the tree shape was created and was matching the concept as close as possible in my feeling of it, what I did next I went back to this very script blueprint, and I replaced the cylinder for the mesh with plane. So I also imported into Unreal a very simple, so this was our cylinder for the trunk. This is only for good visual representation in the editor. And I also made a plane, a trunk plane. It's as you can see, absolutely simple plane, 1 meter long, so 100 centimeters long and 20 centimeters tall. So again, it uses the same Z direction for up. But the only very important part for future processing Houdini is to have an edge in the beginnings, in the middle of the plane. So it's not one rectangle; it's actually two rectangulars with the edge in the middle, as you can see here. So we have this. It's important. You have to have this middle part. Okay, so I went here. I replaced my trunk cylinder with trunk plane. Waited for it to compile. Saved, compiled. I've heard it's better practice always to press first save and then compile, because it might crash in compiling process, but if it's saved, at least you would not lose your work. And then in here, I got this set of planes. And if you can see in a wireframe, it's it consists of this, the whole bunch of them. And that's the reason why I have it 1 meter by 20 centimeters, because I wanted to have many of them, to have a lot of future points along the spline, because again later in Houdini we'll process it all the way, but I needed it to have a lot of geometry to just make the splines more or less smooth. So, and this was pretty much the end of prototyping in Unreal Engine. What I did next is I selected the first blueprint, then I found it in, so it's in content browser, then I press shift on the keyboard and selected the last one. So now I have all the blueprints selected, and the one that I selected first is the trunk. This is important because this is how it actually getting written into FBX file. The first one goes first, and then Houdini sees it as first, and it just will make our life a little bit easier if we would know every time that our trunk is the first entity, because we'll need to split them later. So after I selected all of them, I do actor, merge actors, merge, and I save it in here in foliage folder, static mesh, so doesn't matter. So I already have it here, and every time actually if I would make changes, I would just resave it, agree to resave it. Here I have it here, save everything. Not necessarily, but always good practice, because Unreal crashes more often that is that I would like it to. And then right click on it, asset action, export, and in this case I just put it into disk C in temp folder, just export it as it is, FBX, and when I press save, by default it will have FBX 2013 and a bunch of checkboxes checked. I do it FBX 2020, and I uncheck everything because I do not need any of the settings to be exported. And then I press export, and then I have it. I have my temp folder. I have my FBX file and some other files from previous tutorials, and then in the very end we go to Houdini and we import our tree in here, and this is our tree exactly the way it is in Unreal Engine as a result of our prototyping, as you can see here. So this is it for the first part. In the next part we're going to process it further and actually get our leaves and flowers and textures and everything else. Maybe it will be 2 parts. I will see how it goes. Hopefully I will not go into any long rants. So ask questions if you have any. Hopefully it was helpful, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye bye.